Hello and a warm collisions YYC. Welcome to my guest today, Marcello Di Cintio. How are you, my friend?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, man. Thank you so much for coming on. This is a bit of a different episode for my audience. I often bring on business owners and entrepreneurs, and venture capitalists, and you and I have known each other in another life at another time. You helped me with a project that is really near and dear to my heart, which is my recent book on curiosity. You were my editor, my partner in crime, the person that happened to really helped me go through that process and make that book come alive. And you yourself have just recently, like almost in real time as we're talking, released your latest book, Precarious, The Lives of Migrant Workers. Not only did I want to throw some support and love and appreciate what goes into a project like this, and maybe you'll talk to a little bit about that. I've had so many business associates, fellow business owners who have dealt with the foreign worker program, have had the need in their journeys, whether it was a large landscaper, a bakery, a large bakery here in town, had trouble getting labor, have put forward and worked with these programs, like some of them often many times over the years. And it was a bit of a gong show. So I was kind of thought we might strike an interesting balance between, I know you didn't do this through the business lens, but talk to us a little bit about the book, a little bit of what the passion was behind it, the what and the why, and then let's get into this thing that is maybe lives well behind the scenes of how we get stuff done here in Canada.
Yeah, almost too well behind the scenes. You know, one might make the argument that these workers we're bringing in, who we want their labor, but we don't want them to stay, are far too invisible to the average Canadian. You know, and I think for me, I start the book thinking about my grandfather who had passed away in 2020 at the age of 96, right?
Okay.
And when he was a migrant worker before such a thing existed. He came to Canada a few years after fighting for Italy in World War II. He left behind a wife and 3 daughters back in Italy, with one of them being my mother, and worked in Canada doing construction and greenhouses for a couple years. He never wanted to stay. But that didn't matter because Canada granted him landed immigrant status as soon as he arrived, right?
Okay.
He was permanent if he wanted to be as soon as he arrived.
That would have been late 40s, early 50s, kind of right after World War II?
Like late 50s.
Late 50s, okay.
Yeah. And so when he passed away, that it was during COVID, and which is unfortunate because otherwise that church would have been packed. He was one of the first links in the chain immigration for Italians in Calgary, okay. Right? And so he brought his family here, and then they brought their family and cousins and all this kind of stuff. But that kind of thing wouldn't happen anymore, and that's what I was kind of thinking about at that time. If someone came to Canada to work, to do like a manual labor job like he did, construction, poured concrete, worked in greenhouses, he would be here as a temporary foreign worker. He would be again, like I said, his labor would be welcome, but not his permanent status, right? And so I was really curious then about the people who are the kind of migrant workers in Canada now, those people who did come. And it was only a few years after my grandfather came where all these things changed, right?
I was going to ask how long ago that shift happened. So kind of early 60s kind of thing?
Yeah, the seasonal agricultural worker program was kind of the first. That was 1966. And then the temporary foreign worker program, as we know it, was in 74.
Okay.
Right. So not that long after, within a decade, my grandfather wouldn't have had the same life, and I probably wouldn't be here. Right. He would have been intended to go home after his work permits were up. Right. So I spent the better part of 4 years, and it seemed like 14 years, kind of traveling around Canada, talking to migrant workers about their stories, their experiences in Canada, their lives back home before they came here, and what all that was like for them. In addition to, migrant labor activists and some lawyers and some academics to get a sense of what the system is all about. It was interesting because for me, all my work, this is my 6th book, and I've always been interested in, really the stories of ordinary people, like people's personal histories. I've never been that super interested in policy. But I found, so with this book, what I really wanted to do was like, okay, let's just go talk to, Celeste and Griselda from Guatemala and get their story about what life was like for them there and what life is like for them here. But I quickly realized that I needed the context of the policy to understand their experience. It wasn't enough to get their stories of growing up in Guatemala. or working at a berry farm in Vancouver. I needed to know what were the structures that brought them here in the first place. Something that I hadn't much experience doing. And then once I started with that, you go down that avenue, and then you're like, well, what's the history of this program? And so what ended up happening was what intended to be a book about the lives of migrant workers, and which is the subtitle of the book, is also a story about a section of Canadian history that is that we don't come off very well in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thinking about the policy perspective, like the filter I'm bringing, which I know is not the filter you wrote the book under, was all of these businesses that there was always angst, there was always frustration. It never felt like it was actually serving them either. It felt like it had these workers over here. There was some kind of policy or, a government body in the middle. And then you had the organizations that were starving for labor. And like I said, there was a landscaper, and these are both larger scale businesses, like they weren't small businesses. And they were struggling to find local labor. So they wanted to access these programs. And it was nothing but a headache. So then I circle back to, as you started to unpack this policy or policies, what did you find? Like, what was really driving it? Because who's it serving if it's not serving the worker and it's not serving the business trying to employ the person? What's the agenda? Is it an optics thing? Is it a checkbox exercise? Like, what did you stumble into when you started digging into these policies that, quote unquote, didn't make us look very good?
Well, I'd be interested to hear the specifics of the business owners and their frustrations with the program, because certainly on paper, and I would argue mostly in practice, this policy was meant to serve employers. It is a labor supply mechanism for Canadian businesses and Canadian employers. There is this idea, I think, that Canadians like to have about ourselves. It's like, what we're doing is we're bringing in these people from the global south who are poor, and we're giving them good jobs and giving them a head start so they can support their families better and all these sorts of things.
That sounds very Canadian narrative. Yes, it does.
That is what we want to believe, right? Yeah. And sure enough, the majority of workers that I spoke to felt this way. They did do these jobs to support families back home. They did do these jobs to buy their parents a new house, to support their child's medical issues, all this kinds of stuff. There's always compelling reasons why they're here. But that's not why we have it. We have it to provide workers to employers, period. There's nothing in the government policy that says, this is a benevolent, charitable process. This is not Justin Trudeau hanging out parkas to the Syrian refugees at the airport. Okay. This is something completely different. Okay. So from the business perspective, I suspect the frustrations are in the layers of government bureaucracy.
Yes, very much. It was not an easy thing to access. You'd get it, then they take some of it away, and then they change the rules the next year, which is maybe just the nature of bureaucracy in general.
I think so, but you know what? It was really interesting reading or doing the research for this book on trying to keep the history of the changes straight. Okay. It's only been 50 years, and the amount of policies that have changed, the regulations that have changed, the quotas that have changed, even the names of departments, even that we used to categorize jobs according to A, B, C, D, and now we change it to 1, 2, 3, 4. Like even stuff like that is mind-boggling how complicated it is.
Which sounds like government for the sake of government.
It really seems to be. So I suspect the frustrations on a business side is on that bureaucratic side. Now, to access temporary foreign worker programs, according to how it's designed, a business has to prove that they can't find a Canadian to do that job. Mm-hmm. And so that involves a number of hoops to jump through. To gain
labor studies, and I've heard some of the acronyms that go with some of those things. I've never had to engage it myself, so I'm hearing it all third hand.
Yeah. So not only do they have to prove, well, they have to prove that they can't find a Canadian or permanent resident to do that job, and they have to do that by advertising for the job in 3 different places. They have to prove that we've been trying to find someone, but we can't. Right. And then once they receive this document, it's called a labor market impact assessment.
Oh, that's right.
Again,
Yeah.
the number of acronyms in this is mind, it spins the brain. But they also have to ensure that the worker that comes is access to affordable accommodation since when they're here. They don't have to. Most of the time, you don't have to provide housing, but they have to ensure that the housing exists that is affordable and suitable.
One of these businesses I know, the father who had founded the business back in the 70s or early 80s bought an apartment building very specifically to be able to provide housing at an affordable rate, and he just needed workers so badly that he kind of did whatever it took to try to facilitate the program. Yeah,
and there's a lot of hoops. I mean, they have to pay $1,000 per worker that they bring in under that program. They have to provide return transport to and from, usually airfare for that worker too.
Are they expected to? This maybe sounds like an ignorant question, but are they expected to also be paid at a wage equivalent to what they would pay a Canadian worker?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
My assumption would be yes, but I bet there's some stories where that doesn't take place.
Of course there are, and that's the thing. Like the abuses of the program are widespread, and my book really goes into that. Right, like the biggest problem I would say with these programs is that they enable bad bosses to be bad. It really allows a terrible boss to be terrible. People will say, well, there's the problem, of course, is it's just these are just bad apples, right? And I can't tell you, Tyler, how many times I heard that bloody bad apples metaphor, right? It's not that, sure, there's one shitty farm owner, there's one shitty restaurant manager who's going to be bad. And yeah, that's true. Maybe the majority of bosses are good. But the system is designed, if you're not a good boss, you can be bad very easily and get away with it. Yeah. And so those are the kind of the stories that I heard over and over again. And there's so many ways and layers to that stuff.
As you looked at this, and I think maybe even you and I chatting, or the different waves, like you talked about, your family coming from Italy. Obviously now we're talking about typically Southern global, your people coming up from Mexico and different places. Also, how have we picked that? Has it just moved based on what's the flavor? What's the trend? Is there a political layer of, at a high level, countries doing favors to other countries by doing this? Like, talk to me a little bit about how that's evolved over the last 50. How do we pick who gets to be on the list?
Well, there's a few different things. One is, there's a program, the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program. Okay. That's the one that started first, 1966. Now that program is specifically for workers from Jamaica, the Caribbean, and Mexico, period. Okay. If you're not, so those are, that program is only for nationals of those countries.
And that program's still running in whatever iteration, but that's still called running. That, still running. Okay.
Still called that, yeah. But listen to this, Tyler. This is the kind of stuff that blew my mind and made me not want to wave the maple leaf so high.
Okay. Is that you keep alluding at this, Marcello?
Yeah. So there's
my flag is lowering to half mast as we're talking.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I've written a very unpatriotic book in a very patriotic time. I did not know when I started this book that it was going to be elbows up when the book came out, right? Totally. I didn't know that I was going to be, by the time the book came out, I wouldn't be buying American lemons anymore, or my bourbon habit had to end. I did not know.
Back to Canadian whiskey for you, sir.
Yes, which is just fine with me. Thank you. But I mentioned before that when my grandfather came, my white grandfather came from Europe, in the late 50s, there was no such thing as a temporary foreign worker program. We started getting them when immigration stopped being all white people.
Oh, interesting switch. Yeah,
when the countries that were sending immigrants to Canada stopped just being Europe and started being, the West Indian countries, the South Asia, East Asia, all this. Then the government started saying things like, and this is not my interpretation of things, Tyler. This is like written, these are like statements from politicians. It's like, if we want to maintain the racial makeup of this country, we can't just say no black people can come. We can't just say no brown people can come. But maybe we can have them come temporarily.
We want your labor, but we don't want your,
we don't want your here. We don't want your skin color. I mean, it was as blatant as that.
Because we're talking about the late 50s, early 60s when things were, and the world is still polarizing. I don't want to make it sound like that's all gone away because it has not.
No, of course not. Of course not.
Not even a little bit, actually.
But workers started being immigration started being temporary when immigrants started being black and brown,
being different. Yeah.
Yeah. And and in fact, right now there is a $500 million class action lawsuit against the government of Canada on behalf of seasonal agricultural workers, based on the fact that the whole system that they're working under is based on racism. Now, this will not win. A $500 million lawsuit is not going to win, but it is something that's before courts.
It creates precedents and it creates a bunch of different things.
And awareness
who's
of
putting
what
that
happened.
Who's putting that forward? Who's behind it?
It's a law firm out of Montreal, I believe, on behalf of Jamaican workers, I believe. Yeah. So that's what's coming now, but that only partially answers your question about why people from certain places are coming. Mm-hmm. And in a way, there is a similar sort of, like I mentioned before, my grandfather was the first link of a chain of Italians who come to Calgary. That kind of thing happens too within the temporary foreign worker programs. For example, around the Medicine Hat area, the greenhouses are working by workers from Thailand. Now, there's not a lot of Thai workers in other parts of the country, but for some reason, the greenhouses around Medicine Hat hire Thais. And I think it's just because, they hire one group and they won't keep hiring that same group. They feel that this...
Well, and I've often heard that once you tap into a group, then you get family and you get the same village and you get the adjoining village, and that there's such a different sense of community in a lot of those, from a lot of those backgrounds that are maybe not as tight or not as kind of connected as we can be often in North America. We used to be, but maybe less so. So I often heard, like, if you get in with a good group of individuals, they know more other good group the individuals and nobody wants to screw it up. So everybody kind of works their ass off. I've heard that said from the business owner.
No, it's
they're
true.
great. They're loyal. They're honest. We treat them like family. We love working with them. They're awesome. And they bring in more of the same. They become the vetting process.
Yeah. And and because I hate to put a dark edge onto everything, but there is a, I've heard anecdotes about how, a particular employer will hire people from a particular small town or village, say in India, right? Mm-hmm. I get all my farmers from this particular village in India. Now, if workers who are in Canada start to be unruly, demanding, advocating a little bit more for better working conditions, the employer can say, hey, not only if you're trouble, not only am I going to fire you, I'm going to find another village to bring people here for. Yeah. So not only are you responsible for your own family's kind of livelihood, you might be responsible for your whole village, and so employers have that kind of level of power. Like I said, bad bosses can be very bad under this system, and that's an example of that.
I've kind of made the joke before, and modern management, because I can't threaten your family, because I was talking with a CEO. I was like, oh, I wish it was the good old days. I'm like, just what do you mean by the good old? When do you mean the good old? When you could just boss your people around? And I kind of ribbed on him a bit. He's like, yeah, okay. He was just having a bad HR day. But what I'm hearing you say is that's very much alive and well. If you want to abuse the system, you actually have something to lord over these individuals, and not only them, but their whole their family and their whole village. And nobody wants to be the person who put the whole village's source of revenue in jeopardy. That's interesting.
Right.
When you say it out loud, it makes sense. Like, nobody likes to admit it, but it kind of makes sense. Of course it does.
Yeah. And the thing that really crystallized for me, of all the problems with these programs, from the point of view of the worker, right? I'm sure there are frustrations on the employment side too. But like I said, the book is called The Lives of Migrant Workers, not the lives.
I understand who you focus on, and I'm bringing my kind of business owner agenda.
No, of course, and by all means.
And these individuals that I know are they are more benevolent. They're good human beings. They care. They are the people that you would probably want to work for, but they're still hard jobs. They're still like landscaping jobs, working in a bakery. Like there are jobs that a lot of quote unquote Canadians don't want to do right now, or certainly that's their feeling.
Right. or in that particular place. I mean, I was
Yeah.
looking at the, Pierre Poilievre has never done me any favors until recently, where, like now that he's talking about the temporary foreign worker program, I hope he keeps talking about it and keeps it in the public sphere. I mean,
timing is everything when it comes to publishing a book, for sure, right?
It's true. And quite frankly, I think he and his party's position on it is wrong and ludicrous, and he wouldn't be doing this and saying these things if he was actually prime minister. That's a whole other story.
Okay.
But I looked up, when he was talking about he wants to cancel the temporary foreign workers program. So I looked up his new riding here in Alberta, and I found 25 businesses who are trying to hire migrant workers within his riding. Now he's portraying this as this program is for liberal elites. Well, I don't think you're going to find a lot of liberal elites in Battle River Crowfoot. His.
Where is that coming from? Because if policy is at the root of so much of this, so what is that like? What is that supposed to? And now I don't want to be careful not to get too into politics, but to your point, sure, you kind of got dragged into understanding policy as part of this story. So what is the storyline there when he comes out and says that? Who's benefiting? Who's getting fired up and saying, "Yeah, I'm going to support you because damn those foreign workers"?
I think that they're framing it as as both a housing and a youth unemployment issue.
Okay.
They say, the reason why, one of the reasons why housing is a problem is because of foreign workers or foreign residents, temporary residents. Pardon me, not foreign, temporary residents. The reason why my kid can't get a job at the burger place is because that job's being filled by a temporary migrant worker. They provide a very convenient scapegoat for all kinds of the country's ills, mainly because they can't vote.
I was going like they're kind of nameless, faceless to a certain extent. It's a quintessential them, right?
But voteless.
Yes, yeah. Okay. They actually have no say.
Yeah, they literally have no say. And it's not just the conservatives who did this too. I mean,
well, this has been in place. This has been in place since the 60s, as you made clear. Yeah.
No, but even just last year. Mark Miller, the then immigration minister, is talking about, one of the reasons for the housing problem is temporary workers and international students, kind of temporary residents. Like that was only a year ago that this stuff has been coming out, and there's been changes to the system that came into place, started under Trudeau and now under Carney, which are trying to reduce the number of temporary residents in Canada. As a response to housing, youth unemployment, and these sorts of things. But smarter economists than I have looked at the stats and say that that's not really what the problem is. The problem is your teenager doesn't have a job at Harvey's. That's not because of there's someone from the Philippines working in that job. Okay. I mean that ignores a whole bunch of things.
But it's a convenient talking point is what I'm hearing you say.
Oh, so who's an easier scapegoat than someone with no voice?
Yeah. So when you were out there talking to individuals, and I know you didn't focus on the business owner, but did you sense that, because I know a lot of businesses that rely on it, they function based on it, especially seasonal, especially ag, especially some of the harvesting, like ag it's kind of a make or break all across Canada. Like I grew up in Eastern Canada, I grew up in Quebec, all of the vegetable farms, they brought in droves of foreign workers during harvest season, because even if they only hired local, there just wasn't enough bodies. There just wasn't enough people to do this thing that lasted 6 or 8 weeks. That was a factor. So I'm assuming, you being out there chatting with individuals, what was your, I guess, armchair view of like, do we have too many foreign workers here? Or did you still see that there was a huge gap in terms of the demand from a labor side perspective, that if we brought in more, we could probably put them to work?
It depends on the sector.
Okay.
Agriculture would collapse without seasonal agriculture workers. And
across North America, not just in Canada. Right?
Yeah. And everyone knows that. Like even the conservatives who want to get rid of the TFWP have already said we're going to keep it for agriculture.
Okay, I have heard that.
Because it would be impossible. Caregiving too is something that we can't. Youth unemployment. 17-year-olds are not going to be working in care facilities for the elderly.
Yeah.
You know, they're not like, that's just not going to happen. And those are also jobs that require levels of training that a teenager does not have, right?
Okay.
I mean, that's flat. And with an aging population, blah blah blah. Like we're going to need caregivers from far away.
That's not getting less for sure. No, 100%.
Not getting less. I mean, the fact is, in generally speaking, it's I forget the exact number, but almost 100% of kind of labor in Canada replacing. How does it go? 90% of our net labor intake comes from immigration.
Okay,
like more than 90%. Like we are not providing enough through natural birth. Like
to support our workforce.
We can't support. Like, it would completely collapse the economy. So those certain sectors rely on it 100%, and everyone realizes that. Now, as for those other ones, these kind of low paid burger flipping jobs, say,
entry level,
or maybe the landscaping jobs that your friend was talking about. Is there too many? I think during the pandemic, we supercharged that program.
Yeah.
Right. You know, we needed labor. We brought in lots. Like we saw those numbers jacked up really high, and I don't think anyone would say that can be sustainable. And so we're already I'm not trying to back up, the federal Liberals. They anger me as much as anyone else, but they have so far made good on their commitment to reduce those numbers.
Yep. Okay.
Right. Those numbers are going down. So I think that's going in the right way. I just don't think that blaming all our ills on too many foreign workers is accurate. And I think it's kind of dangerous.
An oversimplification of a complex issue, right?
Yeah, and it enables the worst Canadians. It enables them to see people of color working behind the counter and saying that they don't belong here. You can't take the racism out of some of this response. I'm not saying it's everybody, but it enables that kind of language and that kind of thing where we're gonna blame the other for all our ills, and the other does not look like you and me.
And that is the core of like why racism continues to propagate, because it's so easy to point out difference and look, they look different than I do. Talk to me about some of, and I really appreciate, and also a bit that I know you, the lives of and the things that these individuals went through. What are some of the stories that really turned your, curdled your milk kind of thing? Like when you talk about like abuse being allowed to propagate, what did you run into?
Well, I mean, okay, I'll tell you a couple quick ones. I met this guy from Cuba in Simcoe in Ontario, and he was here working on a ginseng farm. He had a wife and a daughter with a special needs daughter who required a lot of medical attention, very expensive medical attention back in Cuba. So this is what he was doing in Canada, and he'd been here for a number of years. And he gets sick one day, goes to the hospital, and they find out. He goes to examination, and he has cancer, and he has terminal cancer. And that wasn't the worst. And then he also finds out that his employer had not renewed his work permit. So not only did he have a terminal cancer, he had no access to medical care from the Canadian government. He was through no fault of his own. When the employer found out that the employer got angry that he was going to these doctor's visits, instead of working, fired him, even though he had no permit anyway, fired him, and essentially left this guy on his own. Fortunately, he managed to through a COVID era program, managed to get treatment for his cancer. His doctors figured that the cancer, they're positive it's from pesticides and herbicides that he had used on that farm. So his cancer came from the job. And I met him when he was going through chemo. He lost his hair. He was wearing a Toronto Maple Leafs ball cap. Like he had fully kind of absorbed his life here in Canada. Later on, he sent me a photo of himself in hospital with a Maple Leaf, with a Canada flag toque on. But he died on Christmas Eve.
Oh, that's a rough story. Yeah.
You know, they raised money to bring his wife and daughter to, maybe just his wife actually, to Canada to kind of to be at his bedside as he passed away. But he died, and he you know, I can't legally say that it's because of his work conditions, but nor would his doctors, you know, verify that to me.
Yeah.
But it sure seemed that way to everyone involved, and Neil's no longer with us. There's another couple that I met. My favorite couple, I suppose, is these two women from Guatemala, Celeste and Griselda, and they met they're both from small Guatemalan kind of towns. They met at like a vegetable factory in Guatemala, and they became friends, and then they fell in love. But in their little villages, you know, two women having a relationship was frowned upon. Yeah. So they said, we got to get out of here. You know, they're facing abuse from all manner of terrible men. You know, including their fathers, their boyfriend, or the men who wanted to be with them. So they come to Vancouver and work on a berry farm, and they end up together at this berry farm, which was a fluke. But they figure this is like destiny for us to be together. So on this berry farm, owned by one of the richest men in Canada, who owns the Aquilini family, who owns the Vancouver Canucks and just about everything on the West Coast, and they are treated horribly, harassed, having terrible work conditions, money withheld, sexual harassment, all manner of abuse until they finally escape the situation and live undocumented for quite a long time before kind of finally getting their. I believe they have their PR now. By now, they might not. When I met them, they were still undocumented, living in Vancouver, working under the table jobs for employers who treated them badly because they can.
Yeah.
You know,
because they have no rights, because they have no voice, as you said earlier.
It's bad enough as a migrant worker. When you're undocumented, who are you going to complain to?
Yeah, and everybody, and the people that will take advantage of that will take advantage of it. How did you find your way into these relationships? How did you? Because you're a guy from you're a white guy from the outside.
Exactly. I had a very difficult time for that reason.
I bet you did.
I had more doors slammed in my face than I expected. You know, I've written in my previous work. I've gone to Gaza and written about activists. I was on the U.S.-Mexico border and wrote about people who had crossed underneath the border wall. You know, I talked to people who are in very precarious positions, kind of all around the world, and still I got more access to those folks than I did to the migrant laborers here in Canada. I think there's a lot of reasons for it. Some I appreciate. There's nothing in it for the migrant worker to talk to me, to be honest. They're super fucking busy. You know, they sound like they have a lot of time off to chat with some guy.
Yeah.
You know,
who's writing a book that they'll never read. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also if they're in a precarious position, if they're seen as complaining or ungrateful, whatever, they can get fired, and all these things we talked about. You know, they don't want to complain so much or to be seen that way. There's a risk to them talking to media, but there's also there was certain kinds of gatekeepers too. There's a lot of these kind of migrant worker advocacy groups across Canada. Some are very protective about the stories and of their workers. There was a couple of people that wouldn't talk to me because they're writing their own books and they didn't want they saw me as some sort of weird competition. So I don't have a lot of respect for that reason, to be honest. But there was a lot, and so when I did get a foothold, or when someone would talk to me, I was extremely grateful, and I tried to use that person to introduce me to someone else, and then to someone else, and so it took me a long time to earn trust. It took me a long time to meet people. Throw the pandemic on top of this too, because I was
you said the last 4 years, right?
Yeah. There are times where I couldn't even do the work. I couldn't travel anymore to do these things. So it was tough. It was the toughest, by far the toughest book I've ever written, as far as finding the people I needed to talk to. Yeah,
I can only imagine. I'm just picturing a scene from a movie. It's like you start walking in and everybody gets suspicious, and who's this guy and what does he want? Why does he ask? Some guys around asking questions about you, kind of mindset. How do you, from your perspective as an author, as a human being, kind of go in with enough curiosity, but also enough openness to go, this is not going the way I thought. This is not the story I thought I was going to write about. And, maintaining, because curiosity often has got some biases sitting under it, as you and I have written about before or talked about. How do you maintain, and you kind of sounds like when you started writing this book, you had one thing in mind and it kind of dictated a different path. How do you balance that as an author, as a human being, going in with your own agenda and your own blueprint, but also being open enough to going, I guess we're going in a different direction now. And how does that affect the book writing journey?
Well, if you certainly these kind of long, serious nonfiction books that I write, if you go in with your idea chiseled in stone, you're screwed.
Yeah.
You have to have a flexibility that you're not going to find the story you thought you were going to find. That happens all the time.
Because you're like a journalist, but you're on a 4-year timeline. It's a totally different thing.
Yeah. And so you can't get wedded to an idea. You can't be so in love with an idea that when it doesn't pan out, you can't do anything, right? So you have to be flexible. And we can talk about curiosity. Flexibility comes from curiosity.
Yeah.
If my focus is so narrow, and then I get a block, at the end of that focus, and I'm not curious about what's on the other side of that block.
It kind of stops in its tracks. Yeah.
Right. So you have to keep thinking, what's going on around you. And most nonfiction writers, most journalists, we're such nerds for research. So the idea that I was going to do a deep dive and I'm writing about, the first Black people to settle in Southern Ontario after the slavery ended in the United States, like, bring that shit on. Like, I love that stuff. I love that stuff. I know the name of the first tavern that opened in Leamington, by a freed Black slave. Like, I love that stuff.
So there is that passion for the research, which I appreciate.
Yeah. Just to know more and to know more.
And pile enough of it in that eventually a story kind of emerges. That's
what really fuels, and that's the stuff you do while you're sitting at your desk. But I love the travel when I get, and get a chance, even if it's places like Leamington and Simcoe. I mean, this isn't Istanbul,
No, these are arguably not sexy, high traffic locales. Yeah, absolutely.
Great Mexican food, though.
Okay.
So I do enjoy the travel. I enjoy a dodgy motel more than most people. But more than any of those things, it's when I did get the opportunity to sit, at a table with another human being who had an incredible story to tell. And not only do they have this, because we all have incredible stories to tell, I think, but who had one that was relevant to everybody, to what I hope my readership is, but to all Canadians, and who were willing to share it with me. And that's no small thing. None of the people I spoke to for this book or any other book have ever heard of me, Tyler. None of them have ever read my work. None of them knew what I was up to. None of them knew, and yet they trusted me enough to sit with me and tell me the stories of their life. And a lot of it was rough. They're talking about, and not just here, right? There are reasons why
they left a lot of these
they come here, right? The reason why they came here, right? And their willingness to share those stories with me, that's the best part of this job, and I can never take that for granted. That is an enormous gift that these people gave me and continue to give me. And all I can give back, I guess, is, raise awareness for the problems. Okay, that sounds very kind of highfalutin and high and mighty and
altruistic a little bit, yeah.
Altruistic, but also just to get their stories right. To grant their stories the attention and grace that they deserve. And if I'm doing my job as a writer, maybe even the sentences are beautiful sometimes. Maybe even I'm portraying them in a way that they find beautiful to read. And that sounds really high.
You're honoring them to a certain, like you are, for sure. Yeah.
We have to. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm thinking about reading this book and even your own things you thought going in versus at the end, and a collection of human experiences under the guise of migrant workers, if I was just going to listen to you and think about it. But obviously you started on a certain path. And as a reader, am I going to have that same experience in terms of like, you don't know what I'm going in thinking, but this is a whole collection of stories and information that's probably going to give me an opportunity to think about things differently. How did your own thoughts of this process evolve from the start to the end of the book? Taking yourself back to writing it, i.e. reading it, going on the journey.
Yeah, I think there certainly was a journey. It turned from what I thought was going to be a book about these other people's stories to a book that's also about our story as a nation, right? And stories that we are all implicated in. Yeah, I'm not an employer, but I know where those tomatoes come from at Safeway.
Yeah.
And now I have a sense of maybe what the life was like for that Filipino woman behind the counter at Tim Hortons. What they may have gone through to get here, or what they may be going through right now. You know what I mean? Like so I think there's an understanding of Canada that comes out of that I think is, for me, the most valuable thing that I came from. I could have written a series of profiles of Celeste and Griselda and Anil from Cuba, and then honestly, that would have been great. In fact, part of me wishes that's all I had to do. Part of me wishes that I could have got away with just that, but there's not that would be a third of the story. It really is about what's going on here. And now, like I said before, I mean, thank you, Pierre Poilievre, something I've never said before in my life, but it's relevant now. It's at the top of our news feeds now. It's going to become. We're going to be talking about this for the. This is going to be a something that runs our politics for the next little while at least. Mm-hmm. And we should know who's telling us the truth and who isn't. We should know when we're getting a superficial explanation of policy. I'm not trying to sell this book as here's your primer to the political scene right now. That sounds super boring, and it's not. It's not. This is about human beings. But the more we know about their lives, the more we know about what's going on.
Which I really appreciate. Does this give you hope? And I use that word, it's a big word, for the fact that we might get this a little bit better going down? Because, like, you made it very clear at the beginning, maybe this isn't a proud moment when we think about these programs in the reflection of as we see ourselves potentially as Canadians, and those are sweeping statements. Is there hope that we'll make some different choices that would maybe allow us to live up to the narrative we do like to tell about ourselves of being a little bit more benevolent?
I think so, but it's not going to come from our policymakers alone. And I'm glad you asked me about this, because I don't want anyone to think that everyone I'm talking about, all these workers, are silent victims. I met some absolute badasses who have everything to lose, but stood up in front of lawmakers, stood up against their shitty employers, who stood up, people who are undocumented, who could be deported at any minute, standing in the public square, giving interviews to media, talking about the problems and the abuses that are going on behind the scenes. These people are what's going to change things. These people who've got this an immense amount of courage, far more than I do, me running around writing my little book. These are people who are facing deportation. They're facing their lives being completely upturned, and they're having this immense amount of courage to come forward. They will change things. Yeah, I really want to be sure that these people who have no voting rights, as I said, who under these systems are easily exploited and abused, but still have agency and a voice that comes through. We should be listening to them more than listening to me.
I really appreciate
that. And the book is filled with them. The book is filled with those people too. The book is filled with people who are not taking this shit lying down. And even after they've achieved what they need to achieve, even after, for example, this undocumented person gets her permanent residency, she's still, even though she can't be kicked out anymore, like she's won, right? Her and her daughter are here to stay. Yep. She's still standing up for the people behind her who are suffering the same sort of things that she went through. And these people are heroic.
Have you found with some of the people you've shared this book with, as Canadians, maybe we shouldn't be as proud as the narrative as we are, but when you find when people do get the real story, they're like, oh shit, okay, well, maybe this is a way I should vote or a way I should lean in. Like, have you sensed, and I know it's early days getting the book out, but there's like, okay, I didn't know this, now I do. That level of advocacy or that level of action, have you sensed people like, well, where can I get involved? Or who can I, like, wow, this is terrible. I legit had no idea. And, for those of us that are maybe ignorant to some of the realities of what you encountered, like you said, like when things rise up and they reach a critical mass and people are willing to vote accordingly or to choose accordingly or to contribute or support, actions do speak louder than words, but sometimes words are where it starts.
I hope that does happen. We are in early days.
Yeah.
I mean, as we're sitting here, the book is not officially been released yet.
But soon it's going to be, But to keep in mind, podcasts are always in the future. So as this podcast comes out, you can go and buy this book at XYZ. But yes, but I do appreciate we're chatting in early days, which thanks for coming on.
Yeah, these are early days. So I hope so. And it won't just be me. Like I mentioned before, this stuff is in the news. And people are speaking up. There's been a lot of excellent op-eds and journalism. And
your timing is fabulous.
Yeah.
4 years ago, you looked to the future and just timed it perfectly.
Yes, finally.
I know that's not finally how it works. I know that's
finally I get one right.
Compared to some of your other books, does this have more of like the Hidden Life of Taxi Drivers? Yeah, some talked about going to Gaza. This one feels like it's in an interesting kind of lexicon of what's happening today. Like, is this the first book that you've done that you feel might just kind of, like you said, finally you made the joke about timing wise. The other books always engage with topics that are a little bit off the beaten path. This one seems to be an intersection of that with timing.
Yeah, and that's just a fluke, right?
The harder I work, the luckier I get. I'll take all the luck I can find on my journey.
That's right. I wrote a book several years ago about Palestine. And in that book, I spent 2 months in Gaza. Mm-hmm. The final 2 chapters of that book are about my time in Gaza. At the time, like I really wanted to be part of that conversation. And while Palestinian issues are certainly not only 2 years old, it certainly grabbed the world's attention now. And it's not about, I got to be careful the way I say this. It's not about me wanting, that way I would sell more books. That's not what it's about. It's about kind of contributing to a conversation that's ongoing. And landing
when the conversation, we always joke, in brands, whatever the cultural wave is doing, if you can get on that wave, because the odds of creating that as an individual contributor or a small or medium or even a large business is almost impossible. But if the whole wave is going this way and you happen to catch it at the right moment, that's when something can catch fire too, right?
Yeah, and books are so strange. I mean, I almost hesitate to bring up that Palestine Gaza thing because I don't want to sound like I'm trying to be opportunistic because I'm not.
But if you wrote a book that you did some research on and that you're proud of, I'm the blatant marketer over here, so I'll promote it.
Yeah, sure.
Why not get that out there? Because so many people I know don't know what to think because they don't have enough information.
Yeah,
I want to jump on it, and then you run the risk of jumping on some bandwagon with partial information. And personally, that never works out for me. So I don't do it anymore.
On that topic in particular, on Israel-Palestine, actually, well, on every topic, but on that one in particular, I think we should all listen to people who are from that place,
affected by that thing,
affected by that thing, and people who can speak with some level of authority from it. I'm low on that hierarchy, but I lived in Gaza for 2 months. Did you? is what I find myself saying to people all the time. So I would recommend anybody who's looking for some valuable and accurate information not to look at pundits only. To try to find people who've actually been on the ground in these places, and there's lots of them. And but they don't get the voice, they don't get the platform that they deserve nearly as much.
Well, and I certainly, chatting with you and looking at some of your other books, like the humanity of the thread of the humanity that pulls through seems to be the underpinning of all of your work. Always like taxi drivers, the people that were living in the shadow of walls, the people that are here. It's very much about the human journey is what I sense as a consistent theme for you as an author. And as probably just a human being who's curious about other humans. Mm-hmm.
I think so. I mean, that's certainly what fuels everything that I do. I did not interview any politicians for this book, and or ever or any book.
I've interviewed a few, and I try not to interview anymore because it's never fun. Never fun.
Maybe that's not even true. I do speak to the two guys from the Mexican consulate in Leamington. Okay. I did so I guess those are government people. Anyway, but you know what I'm trying to say. I'm far less interested in the people who make the rules than I am the people who have to live by them or are
subject to them. Yeah, under them. That's a really good.
And that's always been the case.
Did you talk to any of the employers through this?
Yeah, I talked to a farm owner in around Simcoe.
Okay.
And he's like one of the good ones. Okay. Everyone seems to think so. And if you look at kind of the history, if you follow the news, he hasn't made the news, which makes him a good one. And he said things that I thought were really, really interesting and kind of enlightened when it comes to how workers should be treated. At the same time, every now and again, he'd drop a little morsel out there that made me raise an eyebrow. He said something along the lines of, maybe if the workers would have to pay for their own accommodation, they wouldn't complain so much. I'm like, oof.
There is the employer-employee dichotomy. I get that.
Yeah, there was a few little pearls he laid out that I'm like, you're just proven anyway, whatever.
There's many perspectives.
I'm sure he's good. I'm sure he's a good guy. His employers love him, so there is that. I can't take that away from him.
Then that is a good sign. If they love you and they follow you and they do good work and you are in turn treat them respectfully. But I think that's just a good lesson overall. I don't think we should reserve that only for foreign workers.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing,
stop
man.
treating people shitty.
But that's the thing. And maybe this is what I should have said from the very beginning. The major problem with all this is that these workers are tied to their employer, right? Yeah. When you come as a foreign worker, you got to work for that guy. Yeah. If you quit or get fired, you got to go home. So you will put up with all kinds of shit.
Yeah, because you have no agency. You have no
agency.
Yeah, no
agency. So that's something that we don't have to. Yeah, we've all had shitty bosses.
But we had the choice to leave. We quit. We did. Yeah, we did.
And we didn't get deported when we quit, or we didn't. So that is the biggest thing that I think needs to change.
Well, it sounds a lot like servitude.
Yeah, and we would not put up with it ourselves.
Yeah,
we would never put up with that ourselves. And in the real world, employers have to compete for labor. When there's a shortage, you say, okay, well, I'm going to pay a little bit more. I'm going to have better benefits. I'm going to, even as I worked in restaurants my whole life, it's like, okay, I serving restaurants, it's pretty much minimum wage across the table, but maybe that place, maybe maybe they give you maybe they pay for your dinner, that way, or maybe. Maybe their Christmas
party. They try a little harder because not only do they have to, it's part of the dynamic, but in this situation, it kind of gets legislated out. Like policy makes you not have to care as much, not have to try as hard.
No.
Which, to your point, it makes it really rife. It makes it fertile grounds for being bad, for acting poorly.
So many workers told me that their employers told them, if you don't like it, you can go home. There's 1,000 more people like you that want this job. Who will do it and not complain, right? And that is the mantra that has been told to migrant workers from coast to coast. You don't like it, go home. There's 1,000 more like you.
Which is so minimizing and so inhumane in that sense. But the nature of the programs, back to why policy is so important to understand, really facilitate that type of behavior for those among us who don't have any moral or ethical hangups of acting that way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's enabling those people. Those bad apples are enabled by the orchard. I don't know.
Well,
they're going to torture the metaphor.
Yeah. We'll beat it to death. Sounds like there's more bushels of those bad apples than there should be.
Yeah, sure.
Since we're going to go with the fruit metaphor, which was maybe really relevant based on migrant workers in ag and harvesting in fruit belts across Canada.
Yes, there's a lot of apple orchards I talk about.
Yeah, I grew up in southern Quebec. There's a significant, right along the U.S. border, there's a large constituent of apple orchards. And that was a huge factor of bringing in, you'd see it in town where all of a sudden you'd notice a whole group of individuals of another color that you don't always see in rural Quebec, to be blunt. And that was reality. And as a kid growing up, those were always the foreign workers. You just got told that. And it wasn't good or bad in my world. It was just, that was them and this was us. And they came in and then they left. That was how it was. But I grew up with farmers. So getting the work done when it needed to get done, getting labor to do it was always a factor. Like it was always a make or break because you're always up against the weather and up against the season.
So did the farmers, did they hire TFWs?
They did. And no one ever really, like, I of course didn't understand the politics or even the administrative side of that back then. But right where I was, no, it was all like your neighbor would help this neighbor. But as soon as you went a little bit more south, they got into larger, there was a lot of vegetable farms and there was a lot of apple orchards. That's where you would see there'd be a large constituent of foreign workers, where we were doing soybeans, corn, like running big harvesting equipment. So you always just had operators where that was a high degree of manual labor. So it was very, like, you had to physically pick the apple or physically sit on a little bench driving along the field, pulling out the potatoes kind of thing. So there was always a constituent of laborers that nobody local would do that job, but they never had to. Like, from my earliest memory, there was always a big wave of workers that would come in to do those highly manual aspects of agriculture. Oftentimes, like I said, vegetables or specialized fruit.
Yeah. Well, since 1966.
Yeah, right? It hasn't really changed. So then that would be the case. So it just was such a, quote unquote, the way it was.
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
and still is.
Marcello, I appreciate the dialogue. And again, I came with a bit of an agenda, putting this into more of a business context. But again, it takes all sides of this, right? You've got the individual businesses that need the worker, need the labor force, however you want to do that. Maybe they don't pay that well, so nobody local wants to do it. So they've got to use these programs. But yet we've got governments that are now posturing and playing this as a bit of a political football. Then you've got individuals that, like you said, they left where they were because it wasn't awesome. They come to Canada, the land of awesomeness, and then we treat them potentially not great. That's not an awesome narrative as well. There's lots of ways to look at this elephant that you've written about here.
Yeah, and the thing is, I feel that what's happening now in the politics that we're listening to, what's in the news, is about the abuse of the system.
Yeah.
So this system is terrible because employers are abusing it by hiring foreigners when they should be hiring Canadians. They're cheating the system. There's abuse of the system. What is very rarely mentioned, or just comes offhand, is the abuse of the worker. That does not factor into the conversation nearly as much as this, and it should. And if we are the nation that we like to believe that we are, then that stuff should matter. Absolutely. And it should come up.
You can't you can't hold those two opposing ideas in your mind simultaneously. No. We're benevolent, but just not for these people, those people.
No, that's right.
And you get into that narrative, which really comes back to racism and us versus them, right? Which is another book and another podcast for another day.
Yes. So
since this is the future, Marcello, how would someone find your book?
All the regular places, like it'll be in all the stores. I encourage everyone to buy from their local independent. Nice. Versus the big boxes and the onlines. But it's it's in all the places you buy books. It'll be there.
I'm going to give a shout out to Owl's Nest Books in Britannia, where they have a couple locations, but I know I was able to get my book there. They're very supportive of local, but they only get to stay if we support them. So let's remember that we all get to romanticize.
That's small. Right.
Your next book can be about small businesses, how we all romanticize it as we're buying from Amazon.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, I love all these small businesses, right. But geez, this Amazon's really convenient.
That's right.
Talk about two narratives that we share, right?
And if you're gonna give a shout out to Owl's Nest, I'll give a shout out to Shelf Life Books.
Nice, dude,
also
please.
In Calgary.
I'm all about the shout outs.
Yeah, in my opinion, best bookstore in Canada. I love that place so much.
Shelf Life
Books. They're extremely supportive of the literary community here in Calgary. They're wonderful.
Amazing. Okay, excellent. I love a proper. I'm a marketer. I love a good shout out. Marcello, thanks for coming on. Thanks for the work you do.
Pleasure.
And I really appreciate the conversation, man. That was great. I really enjoyed it.
Likewise. All right. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.